He still comes back, every morning, to the same wooden bench beneath the old maple tree. But the man he used to walk beside, he isn't coming anymore. People thought it was just routine, but for this little dog, it's a vow one he never broke even when life did. What if I told you love doesn't always speak, but it remembers? And sometimes, the one waiting silently is the one holding everything together. If this story moves, you please like and subscribe. Stay until the end, because what happens next may just warm your heart in ways you didn't expect. It was the kind of autumn morning that crept in like a whisper chill in the air, but not yet cold enough to bite. The leaves in Maplebrook, a quiet New England town, nestled between slow hills and sleepy streets, had just begun their transformation. Gold russet and amber clung to the maple trees that lined the cracked sidewalks. At 6:45 a.m., the town was barely stirring. A light fog hovered over the dewy lawns, and the occasional gust of wind sent leaves tumbling across the pavement like forgotten notes from a song long finished. Walter Green, 78, was already awake. He always was. His body worn by time and softened by solitude no longer obeyed clocks, but followed the rhythm of memory. He moved slowly with hands that had once carved intricate banisters and rocking chairs, now trembling slightly with age. His one-bedroom cottage sat near the corner of Sycamore and Hillcrest, its wooden porch facing east, catching the first light of morning like a ritual. Walter's life had narrowed in recent years. After losing his wife Helen 5 years ago to cancer, the house had become quieter, too quiet. His only company came from the radio, the garden he could no longer tend, and the park 2 blocks away, where he went every morning to sit on a worn wooden bench beneath a towering elm tree. He brought breadcrumbs in his coat pocket for the birds. He didn't speak much, didn't linger with neighbors, but the walk to the park was his tether to the world. That morning, though, Walter paused at his front door, hand on the knob, brow furrowed. Something was different. There at the top step of the porch lay a small dog curled into himself, like a warm roll of gold thread, soaked from the mist and shivering. The animal had no collar, no tag, only eyes that blinked slowly, as if unsure whether to rise or remain invisible. Walter stood still. "Well," he muttered softly as though addressing a leaf that had landed in the wrong yard, "where did you come from?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but he also didn't run. He simply looked up, eyes wide and soft, a shade between honey and sorrow, and slowly uncrossed his front legs as if to present himself for judgment. His fur, though damp, shimmered beneath the porch light. A smaller than usual golden retriever, perhaps just a year old, but lean from hunger. He didn't look wild, but neither did he seem like he'd ever been properly kept. Walter opened the door. The dog didn't move. He sighed. "I'm not one for pets, son. You'll find warmer porches down the road." He turned inside, expecting the matter to end there, but just as he closed the door, there was a soft whimper. Then the faint scrape of paws on wood. Walter looked through the side window and saw the dog now standing tail wagging slowly, as if trying not to ask for too much. Walter opened the door again. "Persistent, huh?" He left it open a few inches and shuffled into the kitchen. He found an old dish and filled it with some leftover chicken and rice from the night before. He set it down just past the threshold. The dog hesitated. Then, with an almost apologetic nod, he stepped inside one paw at a time and began to eat quietly. Walter sat in his armchair watching. No collar, no bark. Just you and that stubborn look. The dog finished, licked the bowl clean, then trotted over and sat at Walter's feet. He didn't demand attention, only rested his head against Walter's slippered foot, breathing softly. For the first time in months, Walter chuckled a dry, surprised sound. "I suppose you need a name?" He looked at the golden coat now drying and fluffing like late summer wheat. The way the early sunlight caught it through the window made the dog glow. "Sonny," he said, "that's what you are. A patch of sunshine that wandered in." Sonny thumped his tail once in agreement. That was how it began. By the third morning, the town noticed. An old man and a little dog walking together down Sycamore Street, the man leaning heavily on his cane, the dog keeping perfect pace. Walter even adjusted his route slightly so they could pass by the elementary school. Sonny liked watching the children. He never barked, just sat quietly and watched, ears perked, as if he understood every laugh and shout. The park bench became their ritual. Walter would sit unwrapping breadcrumbs from a handkerchief and tossing them toward the finches. Sonny would lie beside his feet, sometimes resting his head on Walter's shoe. Sometimes Walter would speak not much, just fragments of stories, half-remembered dreams, bits of woodworking wisdom. Sonny listened always. One morning as they sat, a little girl approached, around 10, with frizzy brown hair tied back in a messy braid and a blue backpack slung low. She paused a few feet away, curious. "Can I pet him?" she asked, pointing at Sonny. Walter looked up, slightly startled. "If he lets you?" Sonny, as if hearing the invitation, stood up and patted over. The girl knelt gently, running her fingers through his fur. "He's soft," she whispered. "He's new," Walter replied. "Showed up on my porch 3 days ago." "I'm Maggie," the girl said, still focused on Sonny. "My house is right over there. Sometimes I sit here when Mom and Dad are fighting." Walter nodded. He didn't ask more. From that day on, Maggie joined them, now and then. Sometimes she brought a granola bar for Sonny. Sometimes she just sat silently beside them. The trio made an odd picture, an old man, a little girl, and a small golden dog, all sharing the same quiet. Sonny had found a place, but more than that, he had unknowingly begun stitching something broken back together. The porch was no longer just a place to pass by. The house was no longer just a shell. The walks, the park, the bench under the elm, these were no longer Walter's alone. They belonged to Sonny now, too, and to Maggie when she needed them. And for the first time in many long, brittle years, Walter felt something stir in the hollowed-out place inside his chest. It was the faint, familiar feeling of belonging. The days that followed Sonny's arrival slipped into a soft and golden rhythm. Every morning, Walter would wake, with the first light pressing against his curtain, the warmth of a little body curled against his slippers, reminding him that he wasn't alone anymore. Sonny, the small golden retriever, with fur like melted butter, would stretch and wag his tail with a quiet kind of happiness, like the world was just right when he was near Walter's feet. Walter would put on his faded flannel shirt, the one Helen used to tease him about. "You look like a lumberjack with no forest," and stuff a paper napkin with biscuit pieces into his coat pocket. These weren't just any biscuits. They were the dry, crumbly ones from the tin he'd kept since Helen passed almond shortbread, now softened at the edges from time and moisture. Sonny loved them. Each day they made the same slow journey to the park. Sycamore Street yawned into soft morning light as the town came alive around them, trash bins, rolling mailboxes, creaking the scent of brewed coffee, slipping through cracked windows. Walter walked with a slight stoop, his cane tapping against the concrete like a metronome. Sonny padded beside him with a steady loyalty, never tugging, never straying, just there, solid and sure. The park was small, almost forgotten, with one wooden bench beneath a sprawling maple tree that hadn't yet lost its leaves. Here Walter and Sonny sat. Walter would crumble biscuits into his palm and toss bits to the gathering birds, sparrows mostly and one bold blue jay, who always landed closer than the rest. Sonny, never chasing, would sit with his head tilted slightly ears, flicking at the rustle of wings. It wasn't long before the neighbors began to notice. One of the regulars was a woman named Janice, who jogged in bright purple leggings and always nodded but never stopped. One morning, she paused just long enough to remark, "He's a good-looking dog. Looks like he belongs in a painting." Then she kept running her earbuds, already pulling her back into rhythm. The most regular presence, though, was a small figure who began appearing just past 7:30. Maggie. At first she lingered from a distance, a 10-year-old with tangled hair, the color of burnt copper, wearing a backpack nearly too big for her frame. She'd sit at the far end of the bench some days, close enough to be seen, but far enough to disappear if she needed to. One morning, she got a little closer. Walter was feeding the birds and muttering about how the blue jay was getting greedy when he noticed her watching. "She got a name?" Maggie asked, pointing towards Sonny. Walter turned. "He's a he. Name's Sonny." "That's a weird name for a dog." Walter grunted. "Well, it stuck." Maggie stepped closer. "Can I pet him?" Sonny had already looked up, ears perked, and thumped his tail against the bench. Walter gave a nod. "If he lets you." She sat cross-legged on the grass, reaching slowly. Sonny sniffed her hand, then placed his chin on her knee, like they were old friends. Maggie smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was cautious, cracked at the edges. Walter noticed that, but he didn't ask questions. He simply handed her a broken piece of biscuit and said, "He likes those. I can share." Over the next week, Maggie became part of the routine. She'd sometimes bring crackers from her lunchbox, and on one occasion, a piece of string cheese that Sunny devoured with tail-wagging gratitude. Walter noticed her clothes were often wrinkled, her backpack half-zipped, and sometimes there were dark circles under her eyes no 10-year-old should carry. Then came the day when she didn't say a word. She just sat there silent, curled up beside Sunny, who laid his head in her lap without hesitation. Walter didn't speak either. He didn't need to. Later that week, as they walked home, Walter passed Mrs. Callahan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who lived 4 houses down. She was short and broad-shouldered, with a knitted shawl always draped over her shoulders and a suspicious glare that had softened a little since Sunny arrived. "You've got company now," she said, gesturing to the dog. "And sometimes a little girl." Walter replied. She sniffed. "That one, Maggie." Her tone dropped. "Trouble at home, I hear. Parents shouting late, mother slams the door. Father doesn't stay long. Poor thing probably needs that dog more than you do." Walter nodded once. "Maybe so." The next day, Maggie brought a small tin with 2 cookies inside. She handed one to Walter, the other she broke in half and gave to Sunny. Then she leaned back on the bench and said, "My mom says dogs are just animals, that they don't remember things." Walter chewed slowly and said, "Well, I reckon some animals remember more than people do." She smiled again this time, softer, and Sunny rested his paw lightly on her shoe. That week, Walter carved a new walking stick in his shed. His hands were slower than before, but still precise. He added a small notch along the grip, just one, but with the plan to add more. One for every new day that still gave him strength to walk to the bench. One for every morning Sunny wagged his tail. One for every time Maggie came and didn't feel like disappearing. By the end of October, the leaves had turned crisp and the air bit sharper against Walter's skin. He wore thicker coats now, wrapped a scarf Helen had once knit for him tightly around his neck. Sunny didn't mind the cold. His fur seemed to glow brighter in the chill. And Maggie kept coming. Some mornings she talked about school. Some mornings she said nothing at all. But always there was the bench, the biscuits, the quiet warmth of 3 lonely hearts learning to beat in rhythm. Walter noticed it first, not in the way he walked, but in the way the world seemed to shift around him. The crisp air that once felt refreshing now clung to his chest. His cane, once an afterthought, became a necessity. That morning, the sunlight filtered through the blinds like always, but the motion of sitting up sent a jolt of fatigue down his spine. Still he dressed slower than usual, the creaking of old joints a quiet protest against duty. When he reached the porch, Sunny was already waiting, tail-wagging, gently, leash in his mouth, like it had become his daily promise. They walked. Walter's pace was slower now, shuffling more than stepping. The sidewalk cracked with time seemed longer than before. Sunny adjusted instinctively, matching every falter with patience, sometimes glancing up as if asking, "Do we turn back today?" But Walter didn't stop. At the park, Maggie was already there. She had started arriving before them, now her backpack beside her feet, its zipper ripped in one corner. She wore the same green hoodie each morning, sleeves too long for her arms, the fabric fraying at the cuffs. She didn't say much at first, just held out a biscuit for Sunny as he climbed up onto the bench and settled beside her. Walter sat carefully, lowering himself, as though gravity had grown stronger. His breath was shallow, not quite wheezing, but enough to make Sunny sit upright in concern. Maggie noticed too. "Are you okay?" she asked. Walter waved her off with a small smile. "I'm just older than I was yesterday." "You said that yesterday," she replied, voice dry. "Then it must be true." She looked away, but not before he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Sunny laid his head across Walter's knee and let out a low huff, as if he too was keeping count of the changes. The bench, once a place of pause, had begun to feel like the destination. Maggie began visiting even on the days Walter didn't make it out early. On one of those mornings, a new face appeared, a young man named Ethan dressed in faded denim and a worn canvas jacket. He stood at the edge of the park for a moment before approaching, his eyes scanning the space like he was looking for a reason to belong. He was lanky, mid-20s, with a mop of unkempt brown hair and calloused hands that betrayed years of manual labor. His smile was hesitant, but kind. "You Maggie?" he asked gently. Maggie stiffened. "Who wants to know I'm Ethan? I help out at the community center. Your teacher mentioned you like this park." Maggie's guard didn't drop entirely, but she nodded. "I'm not here to bother you," he added quickly. "Just wanted to say we're organizing an after-school art thing. You like to draw, right?" She shrugged. "Sometimes." He pulled a folded flyer from his pocket, handed it to her, and then noticed Sunny. That your dog Maggie shook her head. He's his, she said, gesturing toward Walter's empty spot on the bench. Oh, where's he today? Didn't come? He's tired. Ethan crouched down not too close and offered the back of his hand to Sonny, who sniffed it and allowed a brief touch before retreating back to Maggie's side. I'll be around, Ethan said. Don't have to talk if you don't want. Just, I'm here. He came back a few times after that, always respectful, never pressing. Maggie began to speak more usually about Sonny, how he knew when she was sad, how he laid closer on days she didn't feel like talking, how he didn't ask questions. Ethan listened. Quiet was something he understood. One afternoon, Walter made it to the park again, but slower than ever. His right hand trembled more, and his breath came shallow. Sonny kept close body pressed against Walter's leg, his gaze switching constantly between the man and Maggie, sensing something fragile unraveling. When Walter sat down, Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Are you sick? She asked, blunt, but not cruel. Walter stared at the maple leaves dancing above them. I'm just running out of energy. Happens when you've lived a full life. Maggie was quiet. Then she said, That's what they said about my grandma before she died. Walter nodded. Your grandma must have been wise. She used to make cookies with me. I didn't like them that much, but I liked her laugh. Sonny rested his chin on Walter's lap again. Walter looked down at the dog's eyes, warm and unwavering. There's something about dogs, he murmured. They don't get scared by silence. They wait through it. That day Maggie brought her sketchbook. She drew Sonny first, curled at Walter's feet, then Walter, though she had to erase the face 3 times. She gave up and turned it into a silhouette. Later, as the afternoon sun stretched long across the park path, another figure appeared, a woman in her 40s, tall with a narrow frame and sharp cheekbones softened by time. Her name was Sarah, the new social worker in town. She wore practical boots and a pale gray jacket. Her hair was pinned back, exposing a streak of silver that didn't match her age. Her voice was steady, but kind. I've heard about your little routine here, she said as she approached. It's been the talk of our staff meetings. Walter looked up. Do I owe someone rent for sitting here? Sarah smiled. Only gratitude. Kids like Maggie, they don't find places like this often. Places that feel safe. She glanced at Sonny, then knelt to scratch behind his ears. He's a special one. Walter didn't answer right away. His fingers were trembling more today. You worked with kids long, he asked. 17 years, she said. Started after I lost my own brother to the system. He didn't get the quiet spaces, or people who cared. There was a quiet between them, respectful. I'm not here to interfere, she added. Just wanted to say thank you. Walter nodded. We just sit, that's all. Sometimes Sarah said, standing, that's everything. As she walked away, Maggie looked over. You don't like talking about how tired you are, do you? Walter chuckled. Neither do you. She smirked, then leaned her head against Sonny's back. They sat like that as the sun began to set, a small girl, an aging man, and a dog who seemed to understand more than any of them could say. The bench held them all like it had been waiting years for this very trio to come together. The sun rose slowly over the small New England town of Maple Brook, casting a pale gold light across frost-laced rooftops and quiet sidewalks. Autumn had begun its steady retreat, leaving behind skeletons of trees and a crispness in the air that hinted at the coming winter. The sky was washed in shades of silver-blue clouds moving lazily, as if unwilling to disturb the stillness below. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional hum of a heater kicking on or the soft clatter of leaves tumbling across pavement. In a modest cottage near the corner of Sycamore and Hillcrest, the light filtered through aged curtains and fell upon a worn patchwork quilt. Walter Green. 78 years old, once a craftsman of fine wooden things, and now a quiet fixture in his own small world, lay still beneath the covers. His body, though not yet defeated, had given him warning for days, a creeping fatigue in his legs, a heaviness in his chest, and now a stubborn refusal to rise. His breathing was shallow, but steady face slack with sleep that leaned closer to surrender than rest. Beside his bed on the old wool rug, fraying at the edges, sat a small golden retriever, Sonny. Barely over a year old, his frame was still slightly underweight from the months before he found Walter, but his coat had grown thick and soft, with care, a warm caramel gold that seemed to absorb every bit of sunlight. His eyes were dark and expressive, deep pools of understanding that held no language, only unwavering presence. That morning, Sonny waited. He sat in perfect stillness, head slightly tilted, ears alert to every creak of the house. When Walter didn't stir, Sonny let out a soft whimper, not loud, not panicked, just a question. Minutes passed. The house remained quiet. The old man didn't move. Sonny stood, circled once, and then nudged Walter's hand with his nose. No response. He licked the man's fingers gently, then turned toward the bedroom door. Hanging there just as it had for months was the leash, frayed from use, looped carefully on a brass hook Walter had installed when Sonny arrived. With remarkable calm, Sonny reared up on his hind legs and tugged the leash free with his teeth. He padded across the hall, past the faded photographs of Walter and Helen in their younger days, past the shelf with the dusty radio, and toward the front door. The lock had long been replaced with a smart latch one Walter had installed years ago when arthritis made turning a key a challenge. Sonny knew it well. Walter had taught him to press the button panel with his paw. They had practiced it in case of emergency. Walter had always smiled at the idea, never quite expecting it would be needed. But this morning it was. Sonny raised one paw, placed it gently on the panel, and after a soft beep, the door clicked open. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. Leaves scurried across the steps. Sonny paused at the threshold. He looked back once, ears flicking, eyes scanning the empty hallway, as if waiting for Walter to appear, cane in hand, ready to go. But there was only silence. Then Sonny stepped into the cold morning. He walked with purpose, leash still gripped in his mouth, head held low. The streets of Maplebrook were just beginning to wake. A bakery truck rumbled in the distance, the aroma of bread mixing with the scent of wet leaves. A few porch lights blinked off. Birds, startled by the sudden movement of a small golden dog trotting down the sidewalk, alone scattered from the hedges. Sonny didn't pause. He knew the route. Across Sycamore, up the gentle incline of Hillcrest, past the post office with its flag barely lifted by wind, then down the slope toward Willow Park, their park. The entrance to the park was lined with stone pillars and a wooden sign etched with decades of initials. Sonny passed under the arch paws, padding across the path, now slick with dew. The bench was just ahead beneath the broad arms of the old maple tree, now mostly bare, save for a few brave leaves clinging to the top. He reached the bench, circled once, and then climbed onto it. Sitting upright, he placed the leash across his paws and stared forward, waiting. A few joggers passed, one slowed. A woman in her 40s wearing a gray hoodie and earbuds. Her name was Carla, a school counselor at the nearby elementary. She paused, removed one earbud, and tilted her head. That dog. He's usually with someone, she murmured. Sonny made no sound. He only sat there dignified, composed, his gaze unwavering. Carla pulled out her phone. She snapped a photo. The scene was haunting in its simplicity, a small dog sitting alone on a park bench, leash in his paws, staring into the space beside him where someone used to be. She posted the image later with a caption. Every morning, this dog waited for his person. Today, he came alone. Within hours, the post spread through Maplebrook like a whisper through dry leaves. People recognized the dog. They remembered Walter. The old man and the golden pup on the bench had become a familiar sight, a piece of the town's unspoken poetry. Now, something was missing, and everyone felt it. By afternoon, the bench became a quiet place of reverence. A young barista named Luis, who had once handed Walter free coffee samples on cold days, left a small paper cup filled with warm water beside Sonny. A retired nurse named Deborah, short and soft-voiced, with hands that never stopped fidgeting, brought a blanket. She had never spoken to Walter, but she knew loss. Her husband had passed 3 years prior. She placed the blanket gently over the bench's edge. Sonny stayed. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He simply waited. By nightfall, someone placed a candle near the base of the bench. The flame flickered in the breeze, casting long shadows across the leash that lay across Sonny's paws. A soft drizzle began to fall, turning the ground to mud and silvering the leaves. But Sonny remained. Word reached the local paper by evening. The headline the next morning read, "The Dog Who Waited, Maplebrook's Quiet Guardian of the Bench." And in the hospital room, just a few miles away, Walter stirred faintly in his sleep. Monitors beeped softly, steady, but slow. His hand twitched, then settled. A nurse glanced at the chart and adjusted the drip. She didn't know about the dog, not yet, but the town did. And they waited too. The sky over Maple Brook had taken on that soft steel gray color that meant winter was near, and the wind spoke in gentler voices, cooler but not yet cruel. It was the kind of weather where you could still see your breath, but your coat wasn't yet soaked with snow. In front of the hospital, a few maple leaves clung stubbornly to their branches, though most had surrendered to the ground. Inside, room 212, Walter Green lay still, tubes running from his arms, a monitor murmuring steady beeps beside him. His stroke had been mild, but enough to knock him off his feet. Doctors had said he was lucky for his age, lucky to be found in time, lucky to have been taken in by neighbors who cared. But Walter did not feel lucky. He missed the bench. He missed the crisp air and the rustle of birds. Most of all, he missed Sonny. Sonny hadn't seen Walter in 4 days. Each morning, as if programmed by devotion, the small golden retriever rose from his curled place at the front door, nudged the leash off its hook, and gently pushed the front door's latch panel with his paw. The lock clicked open with a soft, mechanical sigh. Sonny stepped into the cold and made his quiet pilgrimage down Sycamore, across Hillcrest, and into Willow Park. He didn't run, he didn't wander. He simply made his way to the same wooden bench beneath the fading maple tree, placed the leash between his paws, and sat, silent, patient, expectant. Word of his vigil had spread beyond the borders of the town. A local reporter had picked up Carla's photo, and now it had gone from social media post to small-town legend. Some visitors came to the park just to see him, to take a picture to share in the emotion of the moment. But Sonny remained indifferent to all of it. He was not waiting for strangers. He was waiting for Walter. Among the quiet visitors was Maggie. She came every morning now, even earlier than before, her school bag dragged behind her, fraying at the bottom, a sticker of a cracked unicorn barely hanging on. Her hoodie had new holes in the sleeves, and her ponytail was uneven like she'd cut it herself. She always brought 2 things, a small thermos filled with lukewarm water, and a Ziploc bag of broken biscuits, almond ones, if she could find them. But most days it was saltines or animal crackers swiped from the school cafeteria. Maggie never tried to walk Sonny. She simply sat beside him. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. But the talking came easier with each passing day. "You know," she said one morning, as Sonny sniffed at her backpack, "my dad called last night." Sonny looked up, ears twitching. "He hasn't called in months. Said he might come visit, but Mom said he's full of hot air. I don't know what that means really, but it doesn't sound good." Sonny blinked slowly, then laid his head against her side. She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I told him about you and Walter. I said there's a dog here who waits. I said you were brave." Across the park, Ethan leaned against a tree, pretending not to watch. He'd been stopping by regularly since the community center began its outreach project in the neighborhood. Ethan, still in his worn denim jacket and beat-up work boots, had taken it upon himself to check on Maggie from a distance. He never approached unless she waved him over, which didn't happen often. But he brought snacks some days and had asked the center to set aside art supplies for her if she ever showed up. "She's a tough kid," he'd told Sarah once, "but she's holding too much inside." Sarah had agreed. Tall, lean, and always in sensible shoes, she moved through the community with quiet confidence. Her eyes were kind but sharp eyes that noticed what others missed. Since her visit to the bench, she had checked on Walter at the hospital and spoken with nurses about visitation rules, trying to find a way to get Sonny closer to his person. Policies were strict, no dogs, not even miracle ones. One evening after finishing her shift, Sarah sat beside Walter. His eyes were closed and his breaths were slow but regular. She spoke anyway. "She's still coming, Maggie, and Sonny too, every day. He doesn't miss it." Walter's hand twitched slightly. Sarah smiled faintly. "He's waiting, Walter. So are we." Back at the park, Maggie was talking about school now. "They make us write essays about our heroes. I picked you. And Sonny. I wrote that sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear flannel and chew biscuits." Sonny thumped his tail once, almost like he understood. Around them, the park was beginning to empty. It was Saturday, and families had come and gone, children had played and been scolded for muddy shoes. A man with a camera had taken several photos of Sonny and Maggie before being chased off by Ethan's glare. Maggie sighed and leaned back on the bench. "You don't talk, but you listen better than anyone." Sonny shifted, resting his head in her lap. "I don't know if Walter's coming back, but I think you believe he will, and maybe I do too." The next morning, something was different. When Maggie arrived, Sonny was already there, but he was sitting more upright than usual, his ears perked toward the entrance of the park. His tail was still but alert. Maggie followed his gaze, heart skipping. There was no one yet, just wind and trees. But Sonny didn't look away. Later that day back at the hospital, Walter's fingers curled slightly around the edge of his blanket. His eyes fluttered open to sliver, then shut again. A nurse, noticing the change, checked his vitals. "He's responding," she whispered. "He's coming back." The frost came quietly to Maple Brook. It did not shout its arrival, but rather crept into the corners of windows and left its silvery mark on mailboxes and rooftops. By early morning, the grass in Willow Park glistened white, and Sonny's breath came out in soft clouds as he walked the now familiar path, a lone leash held gently in his mouth. Each day he waited by the maple bench. Though he no longer looked around as much, his posture remained hopeful. Some days he would lie down, curling his tail around his paws. On others he sat upright, scanning the entrance of the park with the quiet faith of someone who had once been rewarded for waiting. People still came. They brought treats and blankets. Some offered their own dogs for company. But Sonny stayed steadfast, eyes fixed on a reunion he seemed to believe would happen. Maggie watched all of this and felt something heavy in her chest. At home, things weren't better. The fights between her parents had grown colder, quieter, yes, but no less sharp. They rarely spoke to her except to ask where she'd been, but she had stopped trying to explain. It wasn't as though they listened. One evening after dinner, which for her meant a microwave burrito and a juice box, Maggie approached her mother, Elena, with a quiet request. Elena was in her mid-30s, dark-haired with tired eyes and skin that had once been luminous but now seemed dull with fatigue. She had the kind of beauty that life had slowly worn down, not broken, but faded. Once a hopeful artist, she now worked double shifts at the grocery store and barely spoke above a whisper, unless angry. She glanced down at Maggie with surprise. "You want to send a letter to the hospital?" Maggie nodded. "To Mr. Walter. I don't know if he'll read it, but I think he'd like it. And I want to include this." She pulled out a photo printed on school paper, grainy but clear. It showed Sonny sitting at the bench leash and his mouth bathed in morning light. Elena looked at the image. Her expression softened. "All right," she said, exhaling. "Let's find some nice paper." Together at the kitchen table, Maggie dictated. Her words came slowly at first, but with each sentence her voice grew more certain. Elena didn't interrupt. She just wrote in neat rounded letters the way she used to in her journals. "Dear Mr. Walter," it began. "Sonny still waits for you every morning. He always brings the leash. I come too, and we sit on the bench and share biscuits. He misses you. I miss you too, even though I don't know you much. You remind me of someone who once listened." She tucked the photo inside, along with a drawing she'd made of Sonny under the maple tree. The next morning, Elena dropped the envelope off at the hospital during her shift. She didn't say much to the nurses, just smiled shyly and asked them to make sure it reached room 212. Walter had been progressing slowly. He could lift his fingers now and turn his head slightly. Speech was still difficult, but he was alert and aware. That day when the nurse handed him the letter, he held it in trembling hands, eyes scanning the familiar scrawl and photograph. His fingers brushed the picture of Sonny, and his eyes misted. He couldn't speak, but he whispered something like a name. The nurse smiled. "That's your dog, isn't it?" Walter blinked once. The nurse placed the drawing on his tray. "I'll hang this up right by the window." From that moment, Walter's energy shifted. His therapists noticed he began trying harder during exercises. When asked to lift his legs, he did so with shaky determination. When asked to squeeze a ball, he clenched with focus. The medical team attributed it to gradual recovery, but Sarah, who visited every few days, believed otherwise. Back in the park, something else had changed. The town, small as it was, had begun to revolve around Sonny. The local bakery, Howard's Hearth, started leaving out a small bag of dog-friendly scones each morning on the park bench. The retired librarian, Mrs. Kellerman, who wore shawls that smelled of lavender, made sure a clean water bowl was set out daily. Teens from the high school's photography club began documenting Sonny's vigil for their community project. Even the mayor, Gregory Wells, a round man with a kind face and a weakness for sentimental stories, paid a visit. He stood by the bench, hands in his coat pockets, and spoke softly to Sonny. "We're all pulling for him," he said. "And you too." Maggie, amazed at the town's sudden warmth, felt like something sacred was blooming around the bench. People talked more kindly to each other. Strangers offered to walk other people's dogs. There was a sense of togetherness she had never felt, not at home, not at school, not even before her father had left. One morning, she found a note taped to the bench. It read, "To the dog who waits and the girl who keeps him company. Thank you for reminding us what loyalty looks like." It wasn't signed. Maggie smiled and folded the note into her pocket. Back at the hospital, Sarah read Maggie's letter aloud again to Walter this time, with her voice cracking near the end. He moved his lips trying to form a word. "Sonny?" Sarah leaned forward, nearly breathless. "Yes, Sonny. He's still waiting. Every morning." Walter nodded slowly. He was coming back. The first true morning of spring in Maplebrook came softly, as though the sun had only just remembered this small town existed. The snow had long since melted, leaving behind soggy patches of earth and hopeful sprigs of green beneath the bare-branched trees. The sky was a gentle watercolor of peach and gold. Willow Park smelled faintly of damp earth, fresh blossoms, and something else, a quiet anticipation that fluttered in the air like birdsong before dawn. At the hospital room, 212 was no longer filled with the sterile hush of machines and low voices. Instead, it pulsed with the quiet thrum of resolve. Walter sat by the window, no longer pale and paper-thin, but steadier now, his frame still lean, but the light in his eyes returned. He wore a tan wool coat and a navy scarf that Sarah had brought him loosely wrapped around his neck. The nurse, a young man named Eric with auburn hair and an easy smile, adjusted Walter's wheelchair as the elderly man gave a determined nod. "I want to stop by the park," Walter said, his voice gravelly but firm, "before I go home." Eric exchanged a glance with Dr. Greenwald, the attending physician, an older man with deep lines of worry etched into his face. He hesitated, then smiled and patted Walter's shoulder. "Just for a bit," he agreed. "But take it slow." As the van pulled up to the familiar curve of Willow Park, Walter leaned slightly forward, gripping the handles of his chair, as though trying to will himself closer faster. Meanwhile, under the maple tree, Sonny lay coiled like a golden comma against the bench leg. The leash hung beside him, untethered just in case. A pair of robins hopped nearby, and the breeze ruffled his ears, but Sonny didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the park's entrance like they always did. Maggie was already there. She wore a light blue jacket and jeans with grass-stained knees. In one hand, she held a bag of biscuits. The other rested gently on Sonny's head. "I don't think he'll stop waiting until he sees him," she whispered. Then the van door opened. Walter stepped out slowly, not in the wheelchair, but standing wobbly but upright, with Eric supporting one elbow and a cane in his other hand. He took one cautious step, then another. Sonny's ears perked. His tail gave a tentative twitch. And then he knew. With a sudden cry, half whimper, half bark, Sonny bolted across the grass, kicking up clumps of earth and wild clover leash trailing like a banner behind him. Walter froze, arms wide, tears already springing to his eyes. Sonny leapt and pressed his paws gently against Walter's legs, as if to steady him instead of knock him over. His head tucked under Walter's arm, his body trembling with joy. Walter dropped to his knees, embracing the dog with a strength he hadn't used in months. Maggie ran next, nearly tripping as she collided into both of them arms, wrapping around Sonny's thick neck and Walter's shoulder. She was crying but laughing too. "You came back," she said over and over. "You really came back." The sound of clapping rose around them like a tide. Parkgoers who had seen the dog every morning for weeks were suddenly on their feet. Phones were out. Old Mrs. Kellerman wiped her eyes with a tissue embroidered with forget-me-nots. The mayor, Mr. Wells, stood clapping with both hands above his head. Even the grumpy groundskeeper, Mr. Harlan, a wiry man with skin like leather and a perpetual scowl, smiled faintly beneath his cap. Walter, still kneeling in the grass, looked up at them all, blinking against the sunlight. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse, "for keeping him company." Someone had brought a folding chair. Walter was gently guided to it, and Maggie and Sonny settled on either side of him. For a long time, none of them spoke. They just sat, 3 generations, 3 souls knit together by something deeper than chance. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, having driven herself after her shift. She was still in scrubs, hair tied back, glasses fogged from the rush. She paused at the edge of the gathering, her usually composed face crumbling into soft relief as she spotted Walter. Sarah was in her early 40s with a slender build and a thoughtful presence that always made people instinctively speak more quietly around her. She had a habit of folding her hands together when anxious, and a small scar just above her left eyebrow from a childhood bike fall she rarely mentioned. Years working in palliative care had carved patience into her bones, but even she looked undone by the sight. She approached and knelt beside Walter. "You made it," she said, brushing a leaf from his sleeve. "I had to," he replied. They were waiting. She smiled through her tears. They always were. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the maple leaves, just starting to bud. The moment was soft, whole, almost sacred. For a time, the world forgot its rush. Even Maggie's parents, who had come looking for her, after noticing her absence, stood at a distance unsure of what to do. Her mother, Elena, caught sight of her daughter laughing freely and didn't call her back. Not yet. Back at the bench, Maggie reached into her backpack and pulled out a thermos and 2 small paper cups. "I made tea," she said proudly, "mint and honey. My grandma used to drink it when she felt sad." Walter took the cup with slightly shaking hands. "It smells like spring." Sonny leaned against him, tail thudding quietly against the ground. The 3 of them sat under the warming sky, where the sun caught the edge of the maple tree and made it look as though it had caught fire with life again. There were no grand speeches, no ceremonies, just the quiet magic of reunion. The town watched, not intruding understanding. Something delicate and beautiful was taking place. And for that brief moment, all the pieces that had cracked and splintered over the cold months seemed to align. A return not just of a man to a park, but of warmth to a community of light, to a girl's eyes of purpose, to a faithful dog's heart. As Walter looked out over the scene, hand resting atop Sonny's head, he whispered, "It feels like I never left." And perhaps, in some way, he never had. By the time spring returned to Maplebrook, it came not just as a season, but as a celebration. The daffodils bloomed earlier than usual, the trees shook off their winter bones, and the Willow Park seemed to breathe again. The morning air was gentler, the clouds kinder, and the sun, the quiet witness of all things lost and found, beamed down with unwavering affection. Walter stood beneath the old maple tree, where everything had once cracked and mended. His cane still accompanied him, but he needed it less these days. A year had passed since the morning Sonny waited alone on the park bench. Time had softened that ache and folded it into something brighter. He adjusted the small bronze plaque freshly mounted on the backrest of the bench, Sonny's bench, for anyone who needs a little light. The letters were etched by hand by a local artisan, young Jeremy, a boy in his early 20s who worked at the town's hardware shop. He had sandy hair, a gap-toothed grin, and a shy manner. When Walter told him the story behind the bench, Jeremy offered to do the engraving for free. "The dog saved something here," he said. "Maybe more than just one person." The bench wasn't grand, just a sturdy seat tucked beneath the branches painted in a soft shade of green. Around it, Walter had planted a ring of marigolds and purple pansies with Maggie's help. The flowers leaned slightly toward the sun each morning, as if in prayer. Maggie, now a little taller and braver than the girl who used to hide from shouting voices at home, came to the park every day after school. She wore mismatched socks, a backpack covered in dog stickers, and the faint trace of confidence earned not through loudness, but through quiet survival. Her father had left the house months ago, something both painful and relieving. Her mother, Elena, was learning to cook again, learning to listen. Maggie didn't hide in the park anymore. She arrived with purpose. Sonny was aging now. His once buttery coat had begun to silver around the eyes and snout, but he carried himself with grace. No longer the eager pup chasing after every falling leaf. He had become something gentler, a constant, a guardian. He moved with dignity, always one step beside Walter, or with his head gently resting on Maggie's lap. The 3 of them had become a kind of fixture in Willow Park. Mornings belonged to Walter and Sonny, sharing biscuits, reading the paper, watching the squirrels conduct their chaotic ballet. Afternoons, Maggie would arrive with 2 thermoses, one with chamomile tea for Walter, the other with cocoa for herself. Sonny got his favorite treat, a soft-baked peanut butter biscuit made by the town's new bakery. That bakery was the latest addition to the park's quiet revival. It belonged to Naomi, a woman in her late 30s who had moved to Maplebrook after her divorce. She was tall with thick curly black hair, often tied in a red scarf, and a laugh that could echo across the square. Naomi had once been a pastry chef in Chicago, but after losing her younger brother in a motorcycle accident, she left the city behind and found herself here needing stillness. One morning, she saw Sonny waiting on the bench and asked Walter his story. The next day, she brought dog biscuits shaped like suns. Sometimes Naomi joined them on the bench. Sometimes Sarah did too. Sarah had grown gentler since Walter's hospitalization. She still moved with efficiency, her ponytail tight, her gaze alert, but her conversations now held longer pauses, more room. She had even started a weekend book club at the library, partly inspired by the stories Walter told her during his recovery. Sarah was rediscovering how to be more than a caregiver, how to be present. The bench soon became more than a place to rest. It became a ritual. People who had never spoken before now greeted one another here. A man who had lost his wife to cancer sat one afternoon with a sandwich and cried quietly while Sonny laid beside him. A teenager struggling with school brought her sketch pad and drew the park from different angles. A woman named Beatrice in her 60s brought knitting and left a scarf draped over the bench, once a small gift for whoever needed warmth. Walter never expected to become a keeper of anything, but now, every time he sat at that bench with Sonny pressed close and Maggie reading aloud from one of her favorite books, he felt like a lighthouse keeper, just watching quietly, tending the light. "I don't think we're so strange," Maggie said one day, twirling a dandelion between her fingers. "You, me, and Sonny," Walter smiled. "Strange is good. Strange means we didn't give up. You think people ever stop needing the bench?" Walter glanced at the path, where a young couple with a stroller slowed down to read the plaque. "No, I think some people don't even know they need it until they're already sitting down." Sonny, as if to agree, let out a soft sigh and rested his head on Walter's shoe. As spring unfolded in bursts of lilac and birdsong, the trio held their post, not out of duty, but because sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures, but in quiet, faithful ones. In showing up every day, in offering a seat without question, in being present even when no one asks. They didn't chase the sun. They kept it for each other and for anyone who wandered near, needing light. At the end of the day, this story reminds us that loyalty doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply waits in silence, holding space for love, even when no one is watching in our own lives. How often do we walk past quiet acts of devotion without noticing? Maybe it's time we slow down and see the love that stays, no matter what. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs a little warmth today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. What is one quiet act of love you've seen or experienced? Tell us in the comments.